My role going from a technical person to kind of a CISO or leadership or more strategic individual is really helping the business understand the risk and kind of being that bridge between the business units and the technical teams.
Welcome to Life of a CISO. I'm Dr. Eric Cole, your host, and we'll be taking you on a journey each week on what it takes to be a CISO and what are solutions that you can implement today if you are currently a Chief Information Security Officer or if you want to be one in the future. This is Life of a CISO. Welcome. You know what time it is? It's time, my friends. It is time. Roll up your sleeves. We have a great episode for you. It is time for Life of a CISO with yours truly. Dr. E is in the house. And as we're doing on this podcast series, we're doing interviews with some visionaries in the CISO field. And we have Chris with us today. So I'll let him go ahead and introduce himself. But he's been working in this field. He does virtual CISO services. He knows this industry. So Chris, welcome to the show and give a brief intro.
Thank you for having me on. Like yourself, I'm a fellow podcaster, been doing a podcast breaking into cybersecurity, do virtual CISO services for a managed cybersecurity company, helping organizations mostly in the cloud space for my entire career, starting from when Azure was really just Outlook Web Access. And companies were moving from on-prem exchange to the cloud and had no idea what they were in store for. So it's been a wild journey and just really about helping companies understand that they're just moving from one type of compute to another and where the risk is and how to have a good risk conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us. And one of the big things our listeners really are focused on is how do you transition from security engineer to a CISO? Can you tell us a little bit about your journey of how you got started in cybersecurity and then how you transitioned and any tips or tricks of how to make that as seamless as possible?
Well, that's actually the core of my podcast, Breaking into Cybersecurity, is how you transition from, say, maybe a sysadmin into security. Well, my role going from a technical person to kind of a CISO or leadership or more strategic individual is really helping the business understand the risk and kind of being that bridge between the business units and the technical teams and helping them to uncover where those gotchas are in using the different types of technologies in connecting with the different partners or service offerings and what they can do to empower their teams to use the latest and greatest, but do so in a safe manner.
Now, what would you say was one of the biggest barriers in terms of going from like technical, wanting to be hands-on keyboard to more strategy? How do you bridge that gap? And how do you convince executives that you can bridge that gap?
I think one of the biggest things that I've found, and I've been called out for it many times, is elevating yourself from the ones and zeros and removing yourself from that technical conversation to having a human conversation again, because your business leaders don't want to have that technical conversation about managing secrets and how to exchange them in a safe manner. They want to know, okay, well, you're helping the technical team do that, and what do they need to do from a strategic standpoint to prepare themselves for that journey, or where might they need to make some investments to do so. So have that risk-based conversation with them, or this is where you might need to have that investment without necessarily talking about the ones and zeros or that technical risk, unless the leadership team wants to go there. But start with the strategic vision first and then let them guide you down asking those technical questions. Because if you go down the technical route first, one, you could lose them. Two, you could open up the rabbit hole and go down the wrong way and just kind of not end up where you wanted to go with the conversation to begin with. So I would say just kind of start with the strategic vision, the why, the what you're doing, the purpose behind it, and stay at that level until you're ready to go down to the more technical with them. It's a continuous journey and an evolution with your business leaders to do so.
And what are your thoughts on where should the CISO report to in the organization? Because I know there's a lot of debate. Should the CISO report to the CIO? Should the CIO report to the CISO or to the COO? Where do you see the organizational structure of where a CISO should sit within a business?
I think that depends on the type of business and the type of risk that the business takes. Because in a tech forward organization, the CIO and the CISO might have conflicts of interest, and reporting up from the CISO to the CIO. The CIO cares about availability at all costs and might want to overrule security over availability. Whereas if it's, say, a regulated industry, now you want to protect the information, you want to ensure that there's compliance, you want to ensure that the rules are being followed. And now you kind of want the inverse relationship where you want all the rules and regulations followed over availability, because you want that resiliency. You want to be able to resist those adverse events. And if you have a little dip in availability so that your information is protected, so that your infrastructure is protected in the long run, your leaders see that as a better outcome.
And I know one of the big challenges I run across when I work with a lot of CISOs, and I'm sure you do too, is that they keep getting more and more put on their plate, and their whole job is putting out fires, and they don't have any time to really work on the strategy. What advice do you give on how do you manage that when you're just getting everything piled on, but you don't have enough resources or budget to accomplish what needs to be done?
Well, it's a balancing act, and it's a partnership between you and the business. So, um, for example, if you're going through an assessment and there's a business value in the outcome of the assessment, it is of strategic value for the business to work with you to have a positive outcome at the end of the assessment, whether that is finding the gaps to close them or ensuring that the team has a resilient process to begin with so that there are no gaps. And if you're, on the other hand, working with a team where they're like, oh no, assessments, those are all yours, you're responsible for that, then you're a losing battle. And you kind of go, well, no, we help report the health of the organization, we help report the vulnerabilities, but we might not be the ones responsible for the changes. You're the one responsible for the changes. You're the one responsible for the infrastructure. You're the one responsible for the development. We don't turn the knobs here. So it's about having that conversation with leadership as to who's accountable, who's responsible, and who's being informed.
Very true, very true. Uh, Now, lately we're seeing a lot of with this government efficiency, and we're seeing a lot of positions being cut. How do you see the role of the CISO sort of today evolving? Do you still think it's going to be a key position? Do you think it's going to be escalated, de-escalated? Sort of, where do you see the current threat landscape?
That's I think everyone's always looking to make things more efficient. Um, there are times where you see the value in scaling up resources because you see the potential to earn business value in a certain sector. And then um, there could be signs of economic struggle, and you're going to scale back. I think the tech sector is not any different, and the AI hype cycle might prove to some business leaders as, oh, this could be an enabler, but if you don't go into it in a similar strategic fashion as you would with any other go to market strategy, you're going to end up with similar results where you might end up with a bust at the end. And decisions have to be made. And sometimes it's not personal, it's business. And that's how things end up. Unfortunate, but it is business.
Yeah. And one of the questions I get a lot, and I love your opinion on it, is folks will say, hey, I can get a job as a CISO at a smaller company, but it's really a position of one, right? You're really IT security. You have the title, but you don't really have the position. Or I can become a director of security at a larger company, but I don't have the CISO title. Which path do you think would get somebody quicker to be a CISO at a Fortune 50 company?
Depends on what you really want from life, right? There's the title, there's the workload, there's um, what you want from the job, the company, the culture. There's a lot of variables to it. And I think if you chase the title or the paycheck, you tend to get burnt out
Yeah.
chasing just that versus going after the journey and the outcome of the maturity of the journey. And I think if you focus on the outcome and the journey, you tend to feel happier along the way versus, oh, yeah, cool. I got a paycheck. I have the title. Um, yeah, that's my 2 cents there.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned burnout, which I know is a big issue. Like the work-life balance is always the term that comes up a lot these days. With the CISO being so overworked and always putting out fires, what recommendations or what tips or tricks do you have to sort of maintain that balance or maintain your sanity?
Well, work with the business to have a shared responsibility model, just like you do with your vendors, just like you do with everything else. If you're a team of one, you share which team's responding to what, how you deal with on call, how you deal with escalations, how does the organization fund IR? How does it fund DR? How does it plan for incidents? And have that type of resilience into your planning so you don't have to worry about that phone call all the time. And you know that there's processes in place to help with that resiliency and allow you to sleep at night.
And we can't have a podcast without bringing up AI, right? That seems to be the hot word, artificial intelligence everywhere. What is sort of your take on AI, the impact it has on cyber, and where things are headed?
Well, kind of like I mentioned earlier, you have to go into it with a strategic vision of what you want it to do and where you want it to optimize your flow. Um, if you think it's going to replace your workforce, again, it's like chasing the dollar. You might end up with a bust at the end. If you focus on enabling your team and making them more efficient, that is more likely an outcome that you can achieve. So, how do you do that? Find the right tool for it, find the right type of AI for it. AI is such a broad term. It's like saying, oh, cloud computing.
Yep.
It's so vague. It's so generic. You have to go into it a little more narrow focused, a little more strategic in order to get the ROI and the business value that you want and ensure that your information is protected in the manner that your stakeholders and your board and your business expects.
Yeah, and like you said, there's a lot of buzzwords out there, and one of the ones that's sort of been thrown around and it's sort of sizzled up and then goes up and down is zero trust. What are sort of your thoughts on zero trust and how a CISO can use that in their business?
It boils down to who's accessing what, where, and when.
Yeah.
Break it back down to the fundamentals. Does Dr. Eric Cole need access to this service at this time from this machine? Yes,
Probably
no.
not. Probably not.
Make all those decisions at the time, at the place, from that machine, and you provide least privilege, limited access along the way, and that's how you design a zero trust. But if you go to it with, oh, this solution's going to be a zero trust solution, it's going to be a buzzword like AI. And if you don't go into it strategically, designing that least privilege, designing that conditional access, designing just the right in time access, you're not going to have the results that you expect.
And one of the other things that sort of has come up and sort of has died down in the media is the whole whether companies should ban TikTok or other social media apps. What is your thought from a CISO standpoint of what apps should or should not employees be able to use in the office?
Well, that goes back to your acceptable use policy.
Yeah.
Are they using a corporate asset? And is your corporate asset then allowed to upload corporate resources to said sites? And do you have guardrails around protecting your data? If you're using and abusing their time, their resources, then it's a drain on corporate resources. And you do have the levers to control that. If it's on their personal device, that's outside of your scope. If you need them to access corporate resources, there's ways to provide them with managed applications and manage access to corporate emails and things like that without exposing them to the other things on their device, so that they can do what they want with their device, but still have access to the resources that they might need for their job.
And it seems like sort of by default, bring your own device is what every company does today. Nobody really gives corporate devices out. Do you think we'll ever get back to a point where for security and data privacy, the companies will start giving employees devices that are owned by the company, or you think BYOD is sort of here to stay?
Huh, that's a good one. I've I don't think it's gonna get back there. I mean, the devices are lasting so long. Manufacturers are patching them to where they're having a usable lifespan of 5 to 7 years, to where you can ensure some level of safe, compliant use of a device that isn't jailbroken for that period of time, where it could even be economical for most of the user population to use their own device for things like MFA and email, to where, unless absolutely needed, most companies would not invest in that unless they're required to by a regulation, or they really value protecting their company assets, and that's where they choose to invest their resources.
Now, one thing that's come up very recent is sort of cyber war and I mean the possibility. What are sort of your thoughts on how likely is a cyber war and how vulnerable are countries if a cyber war broke out?
It's definitely a possibility. The digital landscape is, I would say, ever evolving. And whether it's a nation state or other type of threat actor, you always have someone attacking you for money or some ulterior motive. So, yes, that's something you have to keep in mind. Whether you're protecting your IP, you're protecting your reputation, it's something you do have to always consider.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned, just going back, so the importance of sort of strategy and policies and risk. How important is it to have sort of that risk posture identified with the executives? Is that something you think the CISO should come up with and present, or is that something you should ask the executives to provide to you?
A little of both. You can open the door to the conversation. You can describe what risk appetite you think might be tolerable, what others in the industry might do, what your peers might do in a certain situation, so that they have a measured example as to how they might react. But ultimately, they're the risk owners, and unless you're accountable, you're informing them and you're making the decision.
Yep. And back to sort of the cyber world, one of the big challenges is sort of a lot of these attackers are from foreign countries. There's not extradition treaties. It's not illegal. How important is sort of having like global laws on cyber, uh, and what impact would or would that not have on a CISO?
Uh, I think that's like having global maritime laws. Yes, it's important. You do need to have some sort of civility in space, in land and sea, in the digital environment. Um, but you have to also have that level of cooperation between the governments in order to enforce any agreements. So you kind of need that trust and balance between all parties in order to even enforce any laws that you agree upon. So even a multinational regulatory agency like NATO relies on all the governments within them to agree upon the enforcement of the laws that they are going to enforce.
Now, as we start to wrap up, do you have any sort of final tips or tricks you want to share with people who want to become a world-class CISO, like some things that might not be obvious or that you've learned along the way?
Yes. Think about risk outside of just your environment. Keep ahead of where the business wants to expand in the upcoming 1, 2, 3 quarters, maybe the next year. Understand if there's any regulatory implications, if there's any digital laws that might be enforceable there, privacy laws that might be enforceable there, data sovereignty laws, because once you expand to those spaces or serve those customers, now you have to enforce compliance. And if your business processes aren't designed to adjust to that, now you have to go redesign your business processes to do so. And that's not always an overnight task.
Makes a lot of sense. Chris, thank you so much for joining us on A Life of a CISO. And until next week, make sure you're focusing on risk. And remember, it's all about the strategy you need to implement within your organization. Thank you for joining us.